Hello everybody, my name is Happy and I'd like to welcome you all to my History Reaction channel. Today we'll be taking a look at World War II by Oversimplified. As always, I will include a link to the original content in the description down below. Please consider heading over to Oversimplified and showing him a little love and support if you like what you see here today. Alright, with that said, I have seen this video before. I've seen a vast majority of Oversimplified videos. There's a couple I haven't hit yet, but before long, I will have covered them all. But this one I've seen a couple of years ago. I don't remember all the details of what he covers and what he doesn't cover, but I remember the broad strokes. As I've been trying to do lately, especially with the oversimplified videos, but with some others as well, I took some time before starting recording this to look up some primary sources from some of the people who were around at this time, in order to share a first-hand accounts or interpretations of what's going on. So I will be sharing those as we come to appropriate parts. With that said, let's just go ahead and get into this and let's learn more about World War II.
It's 1902. A young man by the name of Benito Mussolini moves from Italy to Switzerland to avoid military service. He gets big into socialism, working for trade unions, writing for socialist newspapers, advocating a violent overthrow of European monarchies, the whole shebang. This gets him in a bit of trouble with the Swiss police, so he gets arrested, sent back to Italy, set free, returns to Switzerland, is arrested again, goes back to Italy again, completes his military service after previously avoiding it, and then after a brief stint as an elementary school teacher, he finally returns to work as an avid socialist.
Yeah, so he got an interesting start. He'd been in prison multiple times and somehow still becomes a elementary school teacher. That's one thing that kind of always fascinated me about a lot of these dictators in the 20th century, is some of them had some pretty interesting backgrounds. Of course, Angry Mustache Man, everybody knows, wanted to be a painter. Mussolini was an elementary school teacher. Stalin trained to be an Orthodox priest in his youth. Kind of fascinating what these guys were doing before they became who they became.
Speeches and journalistic abilities made him famous among Italian socialists. He was anti-war, so when Italy colonized Libya in 1910, he rioted and got arrested. Then World War I came along, and once again he protested Italy's involvement. But then he thought, wait a minute, this war could bring about the social climate needed to overthrow European monarchies and bring about the socialist revolution everywhere. And suddenly he was pro-war, but his...
Yeah, so in this regard, he's similar to folks like, say, Vladimir Lenin, who also realized that war, specifically World War I, is creating the environment that will help bring down monarchies or tyrannies or whatever you don't like, and open a potential door for revolution or change if the right people can step in and seize the moment. So this is kind of par for course for this period of time.
Fellow socialists didn't like his new pro-war stance, so they kicked him out of the party. So then he said, you know what? I'm done with socialism. We need something new, not based on class divisions tearing us apart, but based on unity through nationality. We'll conquer the Mediterranean and reunite all Italian peoples, just like the days of the Roman Empire. I'll call it fascismo, and it will guide the Italian nation to greatness. That's all well and good, Mr. Mussolini, but what kind of haircut am I giving you? Let's go with...
Bald.
Bold.
Yes, the guy looks psycho to me. He always has. All right, so let's talk a little bit about fascism, because there's been a lot of debate on what is fascism in modern times, but pretty much throughout the 20th century since it was first established by Mussolini. The term, anyway, fascismo. So let's take a look at what Mussolini defines it as. I've got some quotes from an essay that he wrote. I believe it's around 20 pages originally. It was published in a journal. It later came out in pamphlet form, booklet form. And I will include in a pinned comment a reference so you guys can go look at it yourself if you're interested. But here's some things that Mussolini has to say about what is fascism, what is fascismo. First of all, as regards to the development of mankind, and quite apart from all present political considerations, fascism does not, generally speaking, believe in the possibility of utility of perpetual peace. It therefore discards pacifism as a cloak for cowardly supine renunciation in contradistinction to self-sacrifice. What a mouthful. course, these are translations, so different versions are going to say it slightly differently, but that's quite a mouthful. War alone heats up all human energies to their maximum tension and sets the seal of nobility on those peoples who have the courage to face it. All other tests are substitutes, which never place a man face to face with himself before the alternative of life or death. So he starts off, fascism does not believe, generally speaking, does not believe in peace. It's a very aggressive idea. Aggression, war are necessary for the nobility of the human character, is basically what he's saying, for people to understand themselves, and so on and so forth. But we'll get a little more detail in a moment. Fascism denies that numbers, as such, can be the determining factor in human society. It denies the right of numbers to govern by means of periodical consultations. So in this, he's pushing back against democracy and republicanism. He's saying that fascism denies that majority has anything to do with anything, that majority has the right to decide. And this next quote, I think, will bring that into clearer focus. But then he follows that up with, a little bit later, the keystone of fascist doctrine is its conception of the state, of its essence, its functions, and its aims. For fascism, the state is absolute. Individuals and groups relative. Individuals and groups are admissible insofar as they come within the state. So that is the core of fascism for Mussolini. It is the state comes first. The individual comes second, if at all, and only in as much as it is supporting the state. So the individual is subsumed by the state. The state is all. And the majority has nothing to do with it. This is what the state is. You don't get to argue about your individual rights. What matters is what's best for the state. What's best for you is irrelevant, unless what's best for you is what's best for the state. So that's kind of Mussolini's definition of fascismo, fascism. Okay, let's continue, and then we'll get a different perspective on it in a moment. All right.
Italy had been on the winner's side in World War I, and they hoped they were going to get a lot out of it, but in the end, they only got a little, and they felt cheated. On top of that, a bad economy and weak governments meant that the Italian people were a little unhappy. So when Mussolini came along and said that he could fix everything, his fascist movement gained a lot of support.
Yeah, and that's going to be common throughout history, but especially during this period, is the guy who comes forward and says, I can fix everything, or I can fix it. Or, more importantly, only I can fix it. And you can't just be somebody who says that. You've got to have that force of personality. You've got to convince people that you are the guy that can fix it. And part of that's going to take being aggressive, being authoritative, being somebody who's willing to say, I'm going to do whatever it takes, even if the establishment doesn't like it. This happened a lot during this period. You'll see it with Mussolini. You'll see it with Angry Mustache Man. You'll see it with folks in the Soviet Union, Lenin, for example. Only I can fix it.
In 1922, he went to the king and said, make me prime minister or I'll make me prime minister. And the king said, you and what army? This army.
He had one. Yeah.
Fair enough. Then he went about establishing a dictatorship with himself at its center. Europe had its first fascist dictator. Next up, Germany. Germany had been on the loser's side, and they got absolutely wrecked by the Treaty of Versailles. They lost territory, had to demilitarize the Rhineland, had to reduce their army to just 100,000 men, couldn't have an air force, had to pay the Allies a huge amount of money that it didn't have, and a new rule was established that every Englishman withheld the right to walk into the center of Berlin, pick out any German they wanted, and spank the hell out of them. I made that last one up, but it helps you understand how all this felt to Germans. On top of that,
so that's a really good analogy of how it probably did feel to the Germans, because the reparations under the Treaty of Versailles really did wreck Germany. They put Germany so far down that another war was almost inevitable, because the only way Germany was ever going to get out of that position was going to be to fight back.
Bad economy and weak governments meant that when a small angry man with a silly mustache came along and said that he could fix everything, the German people loved it. Hitler had been a soldier during World War I, and he was crazy patriotic, and nobody was madder than him about
crazy patriotic and crazy racist.
Germany's humiliation, he helped start a new political party, and in 1923 attempted a march on Munich with his boys. And then he got arrested. But his
Let's talk about the new party he created, because there's a lot of controversy on that. I constantly hear or read debates on whether or not the National Socialist Party was socialist. And a lot of people, especially in heated times like we're living in now, where everybody gets polarized, well, the Nazis were socialists. It's right there in the name. Well, the name is meaningless, okay? The Bolsheviks, which literally means the majority, were in the minority when they broke off from the Socialist Party in Russia. That was a ploy by Lenin to boost up the perceived power of his party. He just named it the Bolsheviks, the majority, even though they were actually the minority. You can name your party whatever you want. If people are pushing towards socialism during this time, it might be a smart idea to call yourself socialist. But that's not what's going on here. Hitler, I gotta watch saying that name because YouTube hates that name. And Green Mustache Man had his own definition of socialism that doesn't really jive with any other definition of socialism either in that time or our own. He had his own perspective on what National Socialism was. So, don't take my word for it. Let's go straight to the source here with a couple quotes from Mein Kampf and one from a speech in Munich from 1922. So, here's what Angry Mustache Man has to say about fascism and about the National Socialist Party and what socialism means from his perspective. The state is only a means to an end. So I'm not sure Mussolini would have agreed with that. For Mussolini, the state was the alpha and the omega. For Hitler, the state is only a means to an end. Its end and its purpose is to preserve and promote a community of human beings who are physically as well as spiritually kindred. Above all, it must preserve the existence of the race, thereby providing the indispensable condition for the free development of all forces dormant in that race. So already, when he's talking about fascism and about National Socialism, there's a very strong racial element to this. It's all about, for him, the nation, the state, represents the race. In this case, the German race. And everything, above all else, the state should be serving the interests of your race. And not your race, the German race, specifically. Continuing from later in the same, this is all from Chapter 2, or Volume 2, Chapter 2 of Mein Kampf. The excellence of a state can never be judged by the level of its culture or the degree of importance which the outside world attaches to its power, but that its excellence must be judged by the degree to which its institutions serve the racial stock to which it belongs. Again, for this guy, it's all about the racial stock. Everything revolves around the German race in this case. Whoever is prepared to make the national cause his own to such an extent that he knows no higher ideal than the welfare of his nation. Whoever has understood our great problems has to the same extent made social his own, for he subordinates his own interests to the community. He who does not do this is not social, but selfish. So, in this he kind of agrees with Mussolini. The needs of the individual are subordinated to the needs of the state. In this case, the state is defined by the race, the German race. If you do not subordinate yourself to the state, then you are not socialist. You are selfish. So you already see he's gonna tend to define socialism in terms for the National Socialist Party. Socialist to him is going to mean you're putting the good of your race and your state above your own individual good. And some of his speeches expand on this a lot more. But before we leave Mein Kampf, I hate to recommend reading it, but it's worth glancing through if you really want to understand the mindset of this particular individual as well as those who followed him. Because you can tell what he did and didn't agree with. He absolutely detested Marxism. So when people nowadays argue, well, it's National Socialists, but they were socialists. Well, not if you're talking socialist in terms of Marxism. Class division, class warfare. He definitely is not talking about that kind of socialism. He rails against that kind of socialism. It's about race, not class. All right, one more, and we'll call it good for this. But this one is from his speech from Munich in 1922. Again, I will include a link in a pinned comment. We christened it National Socialist. We said to ourselves that being national means above everything to act with a boundless and all-embracing love for the people, and, if necessary, even to die for it. So he says that a lot. So national means act, you embrace your nation, your race, basically, and you're willing to die for it. That's an important facet of his idea of nationalism. And similarly, to be social, and here he's going to define it specifically, means to build up the state and community of the people, that every individual acts in the interest of the community of people, and must, to such an extent, convinced of the goodness of the honorable straightforwardness of this community of people, as to, again, to be ready to die for it. So, when he's saying National Socialist, he's saying it's all about the state. Everybody must love their country. They must be willing to die for it. What they want is irrelevant unless it's what they want is for the greater good of the state. So in that respect, he does agree with Mussolini. How he defines the state, though, is more along racial lines, specifically racial lines. But also with socialism, when he calls them National Socialists, here he specifically says it means to build up the community of the state, so that everybody is working together to make the state stronger, better, and that everybody is willing to do whatever it takes to advance the good of the community, the state, even if that means dying for it. So it's not Marxist socialism. It's got nothing to do with Marxist socialism. It's something entirely different. So, moving right along.
Popularity grew and grew, and in 1933, the president made him chancellor. He believed he was Germany's great destined savior, and he went full megalomaniac, establishing a dictatorship with himself at its center. Europe had fascist dictator number 2.
Yep.
Hitler and Mussolini had a lot of the same ideas, but more importantly, they had the same enemies, and they started to get along. Anyone else want to be friends? Franco? No? You good? I do. Who's that? It's Japan, and they've taken over northern China. Let's rewind a bit. Japan had isolated itself from the rest of the world for over 200 years until the Americans showed up and said, you're going to trade with us and you're going to like it. Then the
Admiral
Western powers
Perry
imposed a bunch of unequal treaties, meaning Japan's economy was bust. They also had no natural resources, so they...
I wouldn't say no natural resources, but precious few, and not a good variety, not enough to support a growing population in the modern era, especially if you want to militarize, which they do.
They decided to go get some. They went to war with China to gain a sphere of influence over Korea, and they took a bunch of China's stuff. But then the West said, hey, cut that out. And since Japan couldn't take on the West, they said, okay, I guess we'll just go home. Wait a minute, what are you doing? Taking advantage of a weakened China and setting up spheres of influence. But I was the one who weakened them. We know. And you guys didn't let me have anything. We know. That seems unfair. We don't think so. Okay, see ya. So Japan thought, screw this, and went to war with Russia, and stunned everyone by actually winning. Then they fully annexed Korea, but they didn't.
So if you haven't seen the video that I did early, like one of the very first ones I did, the dumbest Russian voyage that nobody talked about, it goes into the Russo-Japanese War in a little more detail. Specifically, the quest to reach the Battle of Tsushima Straits. I can never say that name right, so I probably butchered it. Anyway, yeah, Japan doesn't just beat Russia, it just totally knocks them out of the water. Quite literally. It's a totally humiliating defeat for Russia. It helped bring about the 1905 Russian Revolution. So, yeah, that happened.
Didn't stop there. In World War I, they took Germany's colonies and islands in Asia. And then in an incident that was maybe staged by the Japanese army, a bomb blew up a Japanese train in Manchuria, giving...
Yeah, so that is, the Mukden incident, I believe what it's called. It was in 1931, and it was basically a bombing. Some dynamite was detonated near the railway. I don't think it was directly on a train. It was just some dynamite was detonated near the tracks. It didn't do a whole lot of damage. It didn't really significantly affect the rail schedules or anything like that. But the Japanese used it they blamed it on the Chinese, and they used it as an excuse to escalate tensions in the area and to justify further aggression. In some ways, it's similar to, for example, the explosion on the Maine at the start of the Spanish-American War, where the Maine explodes. It was probably just an accidental boiler blowing up or something along those lines. But the United States blamed it on Spain and used that as an excuse to declare war on Spain. That's kind of what we're seeing here. And it may very well have been the Japanese themselves that detonated that dynamite. Most of the evidence seems to point that way.
Used to launch an invasion and take over. So here's the situation. Nazi Germany, Fascist Italy, and Japan all believe they're racially superior, all feel hostility towards the Allies, and all want to militarize and take over more stuff. And so they did. Let's start with Germany. Hitler hated the Treaty of Versailles, and now he was ready to begin undoing it. In complete violation of the treaty, the first Luftwaffe squadrons were set up, conscription was introduced, and he pumped up his army. The Allies did nothing. Then Hitler sent his army back into the demilitarized Rhineland, giving orders to immediately retreat if the Allies showed up. The Allies did nothing. With his military re-strengthened, he could now move on to step 2. He wanted to rapidly increase the Aryan population, and to do so, he needed Lebensraum, or another
living space. Yeah, he wants... Again, it's all about the German race.
In other words, he would have to take over the world, but for now, a good portion of Europe would do, and he began eyeing up his neighbors. The Allies finally started to get worried, so they implemented a fairly useless diplomatic strategy called appeasement, and it went a little something like this. Hitler would say, "I want that thing," and the Allies would say, "You can't have that thing." "Okay, you can have that thing, but no more." "I want that thing." And repeat.
Austria and Czechoslovakia, I believe is what they're referring to there.
In 1938, Hitler's army marched into Austria and just took it, with no resistance. Boom, this is Germany now. Next, he demanded to be given the Sudetenland, an area of Czechoslovakia with many ethnic Germans. The Allies held a meeting with Hitler in Munich and said, "Look, we're going to give you what... Hang on, this meeting is about my territory. Shouldn't I come to the meeting too? Anyway, we're going to give you what you want."
And we wonder why there is so much resentment in the world towards European powers. And in some cases, the Americans, the United States. We decide the fate of other countries without allowing those countries to represent themselves in the discussion. It happens a lot in the 20th century, especially.
Really? Yeah. Just like that? Yep. What's the catch? Just sign this piece of paper promising you won't invade the rest of Czechoslovakia. Okay. Then Chamberlain returned home victorious, waving his signed piece of paper in the air, declaring crisis to be averted and the continuation of world peace. And we built a statue of Chamberlain in his honor, and every day on the 30th of September we celebrate Chamberlain Day. Hitler's invading the rest of Czechoslovakia.
So, there's a famous quote that comes out of this that a lot of people get wrong. He said peace in our time, but that's not what he said. He actually said peace for our times. I know, minor quibble. But just for fun, let's take a look at the actual quote. This is a real quick one. I just want to toss this in here. So what he actually said was, "My good friend, for the second time in our history, a British Prime Minister had returned from Germany, bringing peace with honor. I believe it is peace for our time. Go home and get a nice, quiet..." Oh boy, could he have not been further from the truth. Oops.
What? He's invading the rest of Czechoslovakia. Oh. You lied to me. What do you expect? I'm Hitler. Not to be outdone, Mussolini also wanted to get in on the action. He thought to himself, isn't there a not yet colonized nation somewhere which is so underdeveloped that the people would be defending themselves against our tanks with literal bows and arrows and wooden spears? Oh, there is?
Yep.
Fantastic.
Ethiopia
and
now.
So he took it. Italy also wanted to control the entrance to the Adriatic Sea, so they occupied Albania. Then, in another incident which was maybe staged by the Japanese, gunfire was exchanged by Japanese and Chinese troops at the Marco Polo Bridge.
Okay, the Marco Polo Bridge incident, what that was the Japanese reported that one of their men had gone missing, and they accused the Chinese of having captured him and taken him prisoner, and they used that as an excuse for escalation. Whether there was actually an officer missing, whether the Chinese actually took that officer, I don't know if there's anybody's ever come up with any conclusive evidence one way or the other. It was probably, again, another staged event to give Japan an excuse to continue their aggressions. But I don't know that there's any definitive proof either way. If there is, if anybody knows of any, I'd love to hear about it.
And the Japanese launched yet another invasion against China. They swept through Beijing and Shanghai, and then advanced through the Yangtze Valley to China's then capital, Nanjing. It was here that saw the worst of Japan's shocking atrocities committed against the Chinese people.
Yeah, so this is the rape of Nanking. I've heard a lot of different numbers thrown around, but it seems like most of them fall in and around 200,000 civilians killed, Chinese civilians killed during the rape in Nanjing. And that's just the killing. There was a lot of other things going on. The rape in Nanjing is not just a figurative title, it's also a literal one. There was a lot of that going on. And this isn't by any means the only atrocity being committed by the Japanese against people over here. You'll get a lot of them in the Philippines, for example, and in other parts of China. And the Japanese are hardly the only one committing atrocities. Let's not get that idea. The Germans obviously have the Holocaust. They had a lot of other atrocities on their to-do list. Hitler had issued a general order to exterminate every man, woman, and child in Leningrad because the Slavs didn't deserve to live. He just never got that far. He certainly killed a lot of Slavs in Leningrad, most of them by starvation and disease, but he wanted them all gone. There was no reason to let them live, just wipe them out. And there are many other examples by various countries against various other countries. And it's not just the tripartite pact, the Axis powers. Why did I say tripartite? The Axis powers, it's not just them. The Allies commit atrocities too. Scales are different in many cases, but there were a lot of them during this war on many fronts.
Back in Europe, Germany and Italy made their relationship status official by signing the Pact of Steel. Then, Hitler turned his eyes towards Poland and the hated Polish corridor splitting Germany in two. At this point, the Allies really had to put their foot down, and they warned him that an invasion of Poland would mean war. Hitler had planned to continue his advance eastward, but he didn't.
They warned him it would be war, but I don't think he really believed that they were going to carry through with that. They hadn't so far, why would they now? I think he really thought that he could probably get away with it, especially since he's about to invite somebody to help him.
He want to end up fighting a war on two fronts, so for now he made an alliance with Stalin, saying, how about we both invade Poland and split it between the two of us, and I definitely won't not refrain from not betraying you sometime in the future.
Makes perfect sense, right?
Sounds good. This new alliance stunned the West. On the 1st of September 1939, German troops entered Poland, and Britain and France declared war on Germany. The Poles fought hard, but they were no match for the two giants crashing down on them from either side.
The Poles don't get enough credit. They really did fight hard. And not just until their country fell. Poles will play pivotal roles in many other battles after this. Poles, for example, are influential in the Battle of Britain. They keep fighting for the duration of the war. So did the French, for that matter, but the Poles especially, they're just everywhere.
Then came a period known as the Phoney War, where everyone just sort of sat around not doing much. The French had launched a small invasion into the Saarland, but they maintained mostly defensive positions, and after a while decided to just turn around and call it a day. Speaking of France, the French were still super proud of their victory in World War I, and they hadn't really moved on from it. They still used horses, they dispatched messages by motorbike instead of using radio, orders from the commander-in-chief were usually pretty vague, and the troops were rarely inspected. They built a line of defenses along their German border, but didn't bother extending it all the way to the Channel, and they wouldn't launch artillery strikes against Germany out of fear of being retaliated against. In a war, they didn't want to attack the enemy. And at first the UK wasn't much better. Chamberlain still naively hoped that the war could be ended diplomatically. Instead of bombing raids, the RAF dropped propaganda leaflets over German cities, which one air marshal said likely did nothing but provide the continent with toilet paper for the duration of the war.
They missed a great opportunity to make that paper out of poison ivy and poison oak.
Also only sent 200,000 men to France, while the French had mobilized millions. Both Britain and France wanted to avoid a repeat of the First World War, and so they wanted to keep the war as far from home as possible. So they turned their eyes north, towards Norway. Neutral Sweden was exporting iron ore to Germany through neutral Norway, so the Allies asked them if they could please stop exporting iron ore to Germany, but this request was refused. Then, the Soviet Union attacked Finland, so the Allies said, how about we land troops in Norway and move them across Sweden to go help out your good pal Finland, and along the way maybe take control of all your armed fields. But Norway and Sweden still said no. So the UK mined the waters around Norway to force any transport ships into international waters, and they also attacked a German tanker they found in the area. Hitler realized what the Allies were up to, and he quickly moved to secure his supply of iron ore. He launched an invasion through Denmark into Norway. The Allies rushed to land troops at key ports along the coast, but Germany had taken control of Norway's airfield, and their air superiority decided the fight. The Allies had to retreat. After this slightly embarrassing failure, Chamberlain resigned and was replaced with Winston Churchill, who had a slightly different approach to dealing with the Germans.
That's a serious understatement.
His overall strategy was similar to Germany's First World War strategy. Attack France, defeat France, knocking out the UK in the process, then turn on the Soviet Union and win the war. During the Phoney War, the Allies had given Hitler time to prepare his forces. Now, he was ready to attack. The Allies had wanted to place troops in Belgium, but Belgium had refused, and in a move that surprised pretty much no one, Hitler launched an invasion to get around France's defenses. The Allies charged into Belgium at full speed to meet the...
Yeah, and this is problematical because Germany has a plan to sneak in through undefended territory to surround them. This will lead to Dunkirk.
German invasion head-on, and it looked like a repeat of the First World War was coming. But this time, Hitler had a trick up his sleeve.
Yeah.
Blitzkrieg. As the Germans advanced, they sent thousands of refugees westward, slowing down the Allies. Then, to the south, the French had left the Ardennes, an area full of hills and forests, pretty under-defended, because they thought it was naturally impenetrable. Well, the Germans were about to penetrate it with everything they had. They smashed 50 Wehrmacht divisions through, and encircled the Allied armies at lightning speed. The best of the Allied forces were now trapped. The Germans squeezed in from all sides, taking out France's best armies, and nearly wiping out the British too, but they managed to make it.
Yeah, and don't underestimate the size of France's army. They had a very strong army at this time, but they lost a lot of it during this.
Desperate last-minute escape at Dunkirk, with British civilian ships even making the perilous journey to bring
amazing evacuation effort.
The Germans breezed through, taking Paris, and France fell. What the Germans couldn't do in World War I, Hitler had done just like that. Hitler hoped that with the fall of France, the UK would also lose hope and sue for peace. But quite annoyingly, it didn't, and he needed to secure the Western Front. So he tried to force them into submission with mind games. The UK were now all alone, and Hitler wanted to emphasize that. First of all, just before France fell, Italy finally declared war on the Allies, making the UK's situation even worse. Next, instead of just occupying all of France, Hitler occupied the coastal areas for defense, but allowed France to continue its existence as a German puppet state. This way, it looked like the UK's old ally had decided to switch sides. Hitler also hoped that the UK wouldn't attack any of her old allies' navy bases or colonies in Africa, giving Hitler an extra line of defense to the south. But the UK made sure to respond to this by sailing down to France's navy base in Algeria and wrecking a bunch of ships. So have at it. Hitler then began laying down plans for an invasion of Great Britain. Before German troops could land on British soil, he would first need air and naval superiority across the Channel. Waves of German bombers came, while the completely outnumbered RAF worked bravely around the clock in an attempt to quell the German attacks. At first, the Luftwaffe targeted British ports and coastal facilities. Then it attacked RAF bases, crippling the RAF's ability to defend the nation. And it looked like Hitler's Great British Invasion was coming. But then, Churchill ordered a small, pretty insignificant bombing raid over Berlin. It didn't do much damage, but Hitler was furious, and he immediately ordered the Luftwaffe to refocus its attacks on civilian targets in London. Children were sent off to the countryside away from their parents to avoid danger, and frequent trips to air raid shelters became a daily occurrence. But British morale held firm. Smiling, knitting, lounging casually, these people had balls of steel. This refocusing on London also gave the RAF breathing space to reorganize, so Hitler kind of shot himself in the foot there. Just the foot for now. Finally, the Luftwaffe sent...
Yeah, so that's kind of important, because that attack on Berlin angered Angry Mustache Man so much. He changed the target, he changed the priority of targets, and he went after civilian targets in places like London, which gave the RAF a chance to recover a bit.
One massive all-out attack on London, and the RAF successfully repelled it, destroying many of the German aircraft and placing air superiority firmly in British hands. Hitler's invasion had to be postponed, but the bombing of British cities continued for some time.
There's actually a really good radio broadcast by Edward R. Murrow, the famous news broadcaster. If you're not familiar with him, he's the one that did the big anti-McCarthy broadcast, but he actually was a correspondent in England during the Battle of Britain, and you can find online radio broadcasts of Murrow describing the scene of some of these attacks, and you can hear the bombs going off in the background. Really, really amazing stuff. It really kind of puts you it helps you visualize what was going on and get a feel for how people there at that time must have felt. Right, and that's it, I guess. So we're at the end of part 1. We will pick up with part 2 tomorrow. I hope I was able to add a little bit. There is so much about World War II that you could spend hours and days going into just the stuff that we covered so far. I tried to hit some things that I knew a little bit about, but world wars and military history have never really been my area of interest, other than specific incidents like the Siege of Leningrad, because my main area of interest tends to be in things like famine, disease, natural disasters, but I hope I could add at least a little bit, and I hope some of those primary sources might help you get a better idea of where Mussolini and Angry Mustache Man were coming from and how they framed their philosophies, and how sometimes terms that we use now may not mean what they meant back then, or at least to these individuals. Anyway, thank you for joining me. I'll see you tomorrow for part 2. Until then, bye-bye.